Catherine will speak on my behalf. Mrs. Meghan Markle has repeatedly written to the palace seeking our intervention in the Epstein matter, but, like Andrew, she must face her own consequences.
The instruction was brief, unmistakable, and powerful enough to change every palace communication that followed. King Charles had reached a decision concerning Meghan that staff could no longer interpret, soften, or quietly avoid. From that moment forward, one familiar royal designation was to disappear from official internal language. It seemed like a change of wording. Inside the palace, however, everyone understood that wording was never just wording. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles read the final instruction twice and left his pen beside the page. He had ordered staff to stop using Meghan's Duchess of Sussex title in palace communications and, when circumstances allowed, refer to her simply as Meghan. The Duchess of Sussex is the royal title granted to Meghan after her marriage to Harry, and inside palace language, such titles can signal rank, connection, and institutional recognition. That was exactly why the king knew this decision would cut deeper than an ordinary editing change. A senior courtier entered carrying the revised wording and began to say, "The Duchess," before stopping halfway through. Charles noticed immediately. The silence that followed told him more than any protest could have done. He looked toward the aide and said, "There must be no ambiguity." The monarch did not raise his voice, yet the restraint made the instruction feel heavier, because everyone understood this was personal as well as procedural. The order reached internal briefing notes, correspondence drafts, scheduling material, and communications prepared for royal offices. A briefing note is simply an internal document used to prepare senior figures and staff with information before decisions or public activity. Charles had not ordered anyone to declare Meghan's title legally gone. He had drawn a narrower line. The palace itself would stop choosing to use it. Then another detail surfaced. An aide opened a confidential folder and found alternative wording prepared several days earlier. Charles had already considered how Meghan would be described after the change, proving that this was not an angry impulse created in a single tense meeting. The king had weighed the consequences before giving the command, and that made the atmosphere even colder. One question remained dangerous enough to silence the room. Meghan had not yet heard the decision directly. An aide finally asked what would happen when she realized the instruction had come personally from Charles. No one answered. The instruction had been issued, but its true force would not be measured in palace stationery. It would be measured in the people whose identities, loyalties, and family wounds were now tied to a single disappearing title. Behind the palace language were two people, carrying years of unresolved history. Charles was not simply deciding how an office should address Meghan, and she was not merely losing a preferred line on a briefing sheet. Their relationship had passed through expectation, fracture, distance, anger, and silence. Now one of the last visible links between Meghan and the institution was being weakened by the man at its center. Meghan read the message once, then again. The Duchess of Sussex was the title she had received after marrying Harry, and palace use of it represented more than ceremony. It acknowledged that her years inside royal life remained part of the monarchy's history. She lowered the phone and asked one question. Had Charles personally approved this? Harry heard the question and understood why it mattered. Prince Harry had watched years of tension turn small decisions into symbols, and to him, this was no harmless change. He crossed the room, stopped, and said that removing his wife's title from palace language felt like an attempt to rewrite where she had once belonged. Meghan stayed quiet, and her silence sharpened his anger. Charles faced the same decision from the opposite side. The king believed palace communications should reflect an active relationship with the institution, not a closeness that no longer existed. Palace communications are the official and internal messages prepared by the royal household, and their wording carried institutional weight. He had grown tired of language suggesting unity where family conflict had produced distance inside the royal family. An aide warned Charles that Harry might interpret the order as an attack on Meghan. The monarch did not look surprised. He said the possibility had already been considered, then asked whether the revised wording had been circulated. That calm answer revealed something harder than anger. Avoiding another clash with his son was no longer enough to make him retreat. Meghan focused on one detail that hurt more than headlines could. Newspapers could continue calling her Duchess, commentators could debate the title, and the public could use whatever language it chose. But Charles's own household had been instructed not to. She told Harry that this was what made the change personal. He looked at the message and asked why his father had chosen this moment. That question opened a darker path. Harry wanted to know what had happened before the order, what had shifted behind closed doors, and why Charles had decided compromise was no longer possible. The answer led back to one palace exchange, where a routine request about royal wording became a direct challenge over authority. To understand why Charles finally acted, everything had to return to that moment. The order did not begin with a public speech, an argument before cameras, or a dramatic family summit. It began with a letter, quietly drafted, carefully worded, and first treated as a minor communications matter. It crossed a palace desk without causing alarm. But one line inside it would provoke an unexpected reaction, and convince Charles that Meghan's title had become a test of royal authority. Charles had tolerated uncertainty for months, because he knew every wording dispute could ignite another family battle. Palace communications teams had struggled over how to describe Harry and Meghan after they stepped away from regular royal duties. Royal duties are the official public responsibilities carried out on behalf of the crown, and that distinction mattered because titles could suggest an active institutional role. Some staff preferred established styles, others wanted neutral names. Then the private request arrived. Meghan's representative sent a formal letter after a charitable event briefing, asking that future palace references use the Duchess of Sussex prominently and consistently whenever she appeared alongside members of the royal family. The royal family, in this context, meant the working and non-working relatives publicly connected to the monarchy. Charles read the paragraph twice, tapped it with one finger, and became still. The king did not shout. He looked at a senior aide and said the palace could not be instructed from outside the institution on how its own communications must be written. That was the moment the disagreement changed shape. Until then, he had treated inconsistent wording as something irritating but manageable. Now he believed the question had become one of authority. Meghan saw the same issue through a different wound. In a documented fictional conversation with Harry, she said consistent use of the designation was not about controlling the palace, but about acknowledging the chapter of her life that had already happened. Harry agreed, telling her that resistance to the title felt like old resentment being disguised as protocol. She asked why recognition had become something the family seemed determined to withhold. Then Charles received a second document. An internal draft had already been altered after the outside request, with staff restoring the full title before he had approved any change. The monarch's concern hardened. He ordered the wording reversed and told the communications office that no outside representative would determine royal household language. Meghan learned that the request had been rejected and turned to Harry with one question: why was his father turning recognition into submission? He had no answer yet. The letter had created the dispute, but paper could contain the anger only so long. Soon Charles and Harry would face each other without carefully drafted language between them. When Harry finally confronted his father, neither man needed an advisor to explain what was at stake. The title dispute had become a symbol for everything they had failed to resolve: Meghan's place in the family, Harry's resentment toward the institution, and Charles's belief that royal authority could not survive endless negotiation. For several tense minutes, the argument stopped being about communication policy. It became a conversation between a wounded son and an exhausted father. Harry had insisted on speaking directly because he no longer wanted messages carried through aides. Prince Harry wanted Charles to explain the decision himself, without polished language softening the meaning. The king agreed, but on one condition: no communications staff, no line-by-line bargaining, and no attempt to turn the meeting into another administrative dispute. He wanted the issue treated as a family conflict, even if the consequences reached far beyond the family. Harry opened with the question he had been carrying since Meghan showed him the revised wording. Why had her title suddenly become unacceptable inside the palace? Charles answered carefully. He said the issue was not whether she had once held a place in royal life, but whether current palace communications should continue suggesting an active institutional relationship after years of separation. Palace communications meant the official and internal language used by the royal household, and the distinction mattered because those words could imply present authority. The Duke pushed his chair back and told his father that removing language did not remove history. Charles replied that preserving history was different from allowing people outside working royal life to define how the institution described itself. The words landed hard. Harry heard distance. The monarch believed he was describing boundaries. Then Meghan's name changed everything. Harry warned that she would understand the order as deliberate humiliation. Charles paused before answering. He said he knew. That admission stunned his son, because it meant the emotional cost had been considered before the instruction was issued. The king then drew the line even more clearly. He said the directive did not attempt to erase a peerage title, which is a formal title within Britain's hereditary system of rank. His order concerned only what the palace itself chose to say. Harry asked whether that wording could be reconsidered. Charles closed the briefing folder between them. The answer came before any words did. Harry rose, knowing the decision was final. Yet as he prepared to leave, another detail reached him. His father had not formed this position entirely alone. Harry walked away believing the argument was personal, but behind Charles' decision stood a colder calculation about institutional control, and one royal voice had helped sharpen it. William did not need to issue the order. His influence was felt in what happened before it. As the future king, he had become increasingly sensitive to the gap between private family relationships and official royal representation. Where Charles still carried the emotions of a father, William viewed the dispute through another lens: precedent. If the palace surrendered control over its own language now, he feared every future boundary would become harder to enforce. William waited until the aides had left before speaking plainly. The prince believed royal communications had to distinguish between working members of the institution and relatives who no longer carried formal duties. Working royals are family members who perform official responsibilities on behalf of the crown, and that distinction mattered because palace wording could suggest current authority where none existed. Charles understood the logic, but he also understood who would feel targeted by it. The future king chose every word carefully because Harry stood behind the argument whether anyone said his name or not. William knew their relationship already carried enough damage, and any recommendation involving Meghan could be read as another personal strike. He told his father that ambiguity had become more dangerous than firmness. Charles studied him in silence, hearing one son advise a boundary that would almost certainly deepen the distance from the other. The king pushed back. He said he did not want the monarchy to look obsessed with diminishing Meghan. William answered that fear of confrontation could not keep deciding palace language forever. He never said, "remove the title." Instead, he asked one question: who ultimately controlled the words issued by the sovereign's household? The sovereign's household means the staff and offices serving the reigning monarch. Charles knew exactly where that question led. Charles returned to the draft after the meeting and rewrote part of it himself. He stripped away any language that sounded angry or personal and reduced the instruction to a direct rule for staff. That mattered because the order could no longer be dismissed as a family outburst. It now carried the colder force of policy. William left the room and paused before rejoining his staff. For a moment, his composure slipped. He knew supporting the boundary might make reconciliation with Harry even harder, perhaps impossible. Still, he had chosen institutional clarity over emotional comfort. Then the private argument moved toward public reality. One palace communication was already being prepared under the new rule, and Meghan was about to see the change with her own eyes. Published, the missing words would make Charles's boundary impossible to ignore. Advice could remain private, and arguments could disappear behind closed doors. The next communication could not. The first visible consequence arrived without ceremony. There was no announcement declaring that the palace had changed its language. No dramatic statement explaining the king's reasoning. Instead, Meghan saw her name inside a routine communication and immediately noticed what was missing. One familiar phrase had vanished. To everyone else, it was a few absent words. To her, the omission confirmed that Charles's private instruction had become operational reality. Meghan read the palace briefing alone before showing it to Harry. A palace briefing is a short official document used to communicate information, decisions, or arrangements within the royal household, and this one concerned attendance around a charitable initiative. The wording referred simply to Prince Harry and Meghan. Her Duchess styling was gone. She pointed to the line and said quietly that now she could see exactly what Charles had intended. Harry reacted faster. The Duke began talking about releasing a statement, arguing that silence would make the omission look acceptable. Meghan stopped him before anger could decide the next move. She said answering immediately would allow the palace to define their relationship through another public fight. He resisted at first, but her restraint forced him to listen. Inside the communications office, editors checked the line twice before publication. Staff knew one accidental restoration of the old styling could be interpreted as defiance of the king's instruction. What had once been automatic was now deliberate. Courtiers began reviewing templates, correspondence systems, and draft notes, removing language that no longer matched the new rule. Charles received the published communication from an aide and read it without comment. The king paused at Meghan's name, then returned the paper without requesting a change. His silence confirmed everything. Later, Camilla asked him during a private fictional conversation whether he had expected the decision to feel so personal once it appeared in public language. The Queen Consort waited as he considered the question. Charles admitted that he had. He told Camilla that avoiding pain could not be the only principle governing the crown, meaning the institution headed by the monarch and the authority carried through it. She did not challenge him, but her concern stayed with him, because both understood that a policy could be administratively clean and emotionally devastating. Meghan reached a different conclusion. She told Harry that she would not contest every reference, every draft, or every omission. If there was anything left worth saying, she wanted to say it directly to Charles, without advisors turning emotion into procedure. The fallout had made the separation visible, but Meghan's refusal to answer with another public battle opened an unexpected path toward the most revealing moment of the entire dispute at last. For all the memos, titles, advisors, and arguments surrounding them, Charles and Meghan had rarely confronted the central wound without another person carrying the message. This time there would be no spokesman translating intent, no family member escalating emotion, and no palace official hiding uncomfortable language behind protocol. Their private conversation would not restore what had been lost. But for the first time, each would hear why the other believed the title mattered. Meghan asked for the conversation because she wanted clarity, not another chain of carefully managed responses. She needed to know whether Charles had acted to punish her or to draw an institutional boundary he believed had become necessary. An institutional boundary simply means a formal limit set by the monarchy to separate personal family relationships from official royal roles. The king agreed because he had begun to see how years of intermediaries had allowed resentment to grow around assumptions neither side had tested directly. Meghan spoke first. She told Charles that seeing the title deliberately removed made her feel as though the palace were trying to erase a chapter of her life. She did not raise her voice. That restraint made the admission harder to dismiss. The monarch listened without interrupting, because he understood that she was no longer arguing about wording alone. Charles answered with equal care. He said he was not denying that she had entered royal history as the Duchess of Sussex. His concern was the present. Palace language, he argued, should reflect the relationship that existed now rather than repeatedly suggest an active institutional connection that had already changed. Meghan heard the logic, but she refused to accept the idea that logic erased emotional consequence. The silence tightened when she told him that institutions often call their decisions neutral, while the people receiving them feel every ounce of their weight. Charles did not contradict her. Instead, he admitted that he had known the instruction would hurt. The king said he regretted that pain, but he would not withdraw the order. Meghan did not demand surrender. She did not ask Charles to restore the wording during their conversation, and he did not ask her to stop using the title publicly elsewhere. That distinction finally defined the limits of the battle. Neither had won, but both now understood exactly what the other believed. Charles ended the conversation knowing honesty had not created reconciliation. Meghan left with the same conclusion. Yet something had shifted. Outside that private exchange, people were beginning to notice a pattern. Charles and Meghan had finally said what neither could say through advisors, but the missing title was about to become the most discussed pair of absent words in the royal story. The public did not need an official announcement. Once the wording pattern was spotted, the absence became the story. Commentators compared old palace communications with new ones. Broadcasters debated whether the change represented discipline or unnecessary symbolism, and crowds outside royal residences argued over what a title should mean after someone leaves active royal life. Charles's quiet internal order had escaped the palace without a single confidential document being leaked. Meghan's missing styling was impossible to ignore. Media organizations compared palace communications and noticed that Duchess of Sussex had disappeared consistently, while other royal forms remained untouched. Palace communications are the official and internal messages issued or prepared by the royal household, and that mattered because repeated wording could signal who the institution chose to recognize in an active way. Debate split immediately. Then one front page captured everything. A fictional national newspaper printed the headline, "Just Meghan," above two palace references placed side by side, an older one using Duchess of Sussex, and a newer one naming only Meghan. The comparison stung. Supporters called the change unnecessary and personal. Others argued that the monarchy had every right to define its own official language after a working relationship had ended. Outside Buckingham Palace, the argument became human. A small crowd gathered near the gates while television crews reported live. One woman held a royal wedding souvenir and insisted that history could not be edited simply because relationships had broken down. Another spectator answered that the crown had to control its own voice. Buckingham Palace is the monarch's principal London residence and one of the most visible symbols of the institution, which made the location itself part of the emotional pressure. Charles saw the same headline over breakfast and studied it for several seconds. The king told an aide not to issue a defensive explanation because another statement would turn a communications rule into a personal campaign. He had wanted clarity. Now that clarity was producing noise beyond anything a private instruction could contain. Meghan experienced the headline differently. She felt a painful family issue had been reduced to two sensational words. Harry wanted to condemn the coverage, but she stopped him again, saying another public clash would only feed the story. The Duke reluctantly held back, while she chose silence over another round of accusation. Palace staff did not retreat. Charles allowed the wording policy to stand, proving it had been designed to survive scrutiny rather than disappear once noticed. The world had delivered its judgment in headlines and arguments, but the final verdict would come from what remained after the outrage faded, and Charles, Meghan, and Harry faced what the decision had permanently changed. When the noise finally diminished, the meaning of Charles's order became impossible to avoid. He had not healed the family's deepest wound. Meghan had not surrendered her identity, and Harry had not accepted the palace's reasoning, yet something had been settled permanently. The monarchy had decided how it would speak. Meghan had decided how much power she would give that language. And the family had learned the price of drawing a boundary that could not be taken back. Charles allowed the instruction to remain in place. The king did not reverse the wording, and palace staff continued using the revised terminology. Palace communications are the official and internal messages prepared by the royal household, and controlling that language mattered because it defined the institution's present relationship with those around it. He had secured clarity, but clarity came with a cost he could no longer pretend was only administrative. Meghan reached her own conclusion. She understood that forcing Charles's household to use the Duchess designation would not restore trust, affection, or belonging. The title remained part of her history, but she stopped treating palace recognition as the final measure of that history. She no longer needed the institution's wording to confirm what she had lived. Harry struggled with something deeper. The Duke realized the real loss was not a missing title on a document. It was the distance between a father and son, who could once have discussed such matters privately, before every disagreement became a symbol of estrangement. He accepted that the old relationship with Charles's institution had changed, perhaps beyond repair. William saw the same truth from another side. The prince had supported firmer boundaries because he believed ambiguity weakened the monarchy. Yet he now understood that rules could protect an institution without repairing a family. His support ended not in victory, but in sober recognition of what firmness could never restore. Charles faced that truth alone when another communication reached his desk. He read Meghan's name, saw the revised wording, and set the document down without satisfaction. The monarch had won control over the palace's voice, but he also knew that control had exposed how much emotional ground had already been lost. Nobody truly won. Meghan kept her identity. Harry accepted the separation. William accepted the cost. Charles kept the boundary. The crown had settled a question of protocol, but in doing so, it revealed the deeper truth. Institutional clarity can end an argument, Yet it cannot rebuild affection once trust has broken. That was the final cost of certainty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.